Hey, good afternoon. What the hell? Good afternoon. Oh, that's much better. Jeez. It is very nice to be back to talk a little bit about real estate here in the Great Orange County. I'm just making sure I got my remote control here. You know, it's funny because last year you invited me back to give a forecast, but if you remember last year, I didn't give you much of a forecast. What I did was I gave you a lunch story. And really the story is more important than the forecast itself because it's explaining where your intuition comes from, where your ideas come from, being able to help your clients untangle all the chaos that's going on there. That's what's important at very level. Now, mind you, the statistics are still really helpful, and I'm to understand we have a couple, shall we say, volunteer statisticians, Steve Thomas and Dave Gerling. You guys here? Raise your hand for me. I hear these guys doing some great jobs. So they'll call me, and I'll help with the story, and they're going to help you with the statistics, as the case may be. Now let's get right into it. Really? Excuse me, I'm supposed to have this done for me. That was in part of our contractual agreement. Here, let's see here. All right. Oh, look, a light. That's very exciting. Okay. So maybe that'll work. Let's get right into it. There it is. All right. The story over the last 18 months, this. Never in my wildest dreams when this man was elected. I was like, wow, this is going to be interesting. I had no idea. Every single day, I call it a weapons of mass distraction because we are so focused on this that guess what? We've actually lost the story. And to me, that is probably the biggest single problem with this administration. We're so busy talking about the administration, we forgot about the country the administration is supposed to be administering to. And, you know, in a lot of ways, that distraction I think keeps us from fully appreciating what's happening, both good and bad, in our economy today. It becomes, if you will, the center of the conversation when it really shouldn't be. And in fact, you know, I've done this talk, and, you know, listen, we're in California. I could do this talk, I could do an hour of punchlines about Trump. We're in a comedy theater. It would be easy to do. And probably in California, unlike, say, Texas, it would probably be appreciated. But I'm not going to do that because this is not the point. And I think everybody needs to understand that. And indeed, you know, I like to point out that there are those who think that Trump is the font of all our problems, and there are others who think that Trump is the solution to all our problems. And the answer really is that Trump is the guy who is a symptom of our true problems. And our true problems is this devolvement into tribalism, this devolvement into a state where it's not what you're for, but who you're for that becomes important. When it's irrelevant to me what our leader does as long as he's my party, that's a huge problem. And that's certainly not restricted to the left or the right, as the case may be. Both parties have seen, I think, this dangerous devolvement into tribal instincts. And that's not good, because this country needs to go back to caring about this country, not our party. And that's thinking. So, you know, it kind of boils down to this here, where it's getting so bad that, you know, one of my guys found this cartoon. You know, here's Brad with the Democratic weather. Now we're going to have Tammy with the Republican weather. Well, listen, I'm here to give you the weather report, okay? Simple as that. That's my job today. And what is the weather report? Well, here it is. The good is simple. The economy's good. You know, we came into 2017 with a pretty good head of steam. 2017 did not disappoint. It was a great year. Not spectacular, but about as great as we've seen since the Great Recession has came to an end. 2018 has all the momentum of 2017 with the added bonus of the tax cut that will be stimulative to the economy. And yes, even here in Orange County, because I understand that some of the hit having to do with state and local deductions is there. Forget about it. It's irrelevant. We're going to breeze by this as if it's not even part of the conversation, as the case may be. Chance of recession, still basically very, very low at this point in time. 24 months, that's what we have. 24 months, I just don't see the shock to the system. Now, I realize that that means I predicted that this is going to be the longest expansion ever. And I would tell you, I don't care. I always love when you get an economist in front of you and they immediately have to do a bar chart telling you how long this expansion is. And they'll put up the different expansions, and then they'll tell you very seriously that in 3 months, 7 days, 4 hours, 22 minutes, and 14 seconds, this is going to be the second largest expansion. As if somehow or other the length of an expansion tells you anything. It doesn't. It's irrelevant. Every expansion is permanent until it is cruelly murdered by a negative shock. Predicting a recession is predicting that negative shock. Where's it going to come from? Not in the cards, not yet. The bad, now there is bad as well. As good as things are good, at the same time some things are popping up. Labor shortage issues, which is going to be problematic, particularly here in Orange County. Recent market volatility, think of the rise in interest rates, some of the shakeup in the stock market. You have an aggressive Fed that continues to stomp on the brake really hard, which is interesting. Sharp growth in government deficits coming down the pike, you got to pay attention to the global decline in consumer savings, and of course these recent global trade worries. All issues, things you can pay attention to, things that could have some negative impacts on the economy, but nothing at this point in time, again, that says recession. Rather, what I would say is perhaps somewhere in this list of things, the next recession is being born, but again, not for the next 2 years, not in the cards. As for the ugly, it's politics. The politics, the tribalism, the distractions, the fact that we're not dealing with underinvestment in infrastructure, rising wealth and income inequality, healthcare cost inflation, pension entitlements, and so on and so forth. All the things that we need to take care of, not just now, but last year and the year before and the year before, and we keep doing nothing. Because every time anybody has any serious conversations, we immediately get distracted by whatever ridiculous soap opera twist to events occurred in the White House yesterday, which is not good. We need to start focusing on the real issues, because at some point in time, these things are going to come back to haunt us. But focus on the good, be aware of the bad. That's the key. So, where does this optimism come from? GDP, year over year, about 2.6% in real terms. Pretty good. The best? No, the best was back in 2013-14 when we were getting up in the 3.5% range because the oil market was going crazy. But we did see that pick up because of, again, the fading of the commodity bust and the picking up of the global economy. The big increase in growth last year came from business spending in particular. Businesses started investing in a pretty good way. Okay. As noted, oil production was one of the big things that helped kind of zoom that along. Okay, all right. We have a very touchy remote control in our hand, as I was warned. So I'm still experimenting with it. Part of the issue, of course, that exports have picked up has to do with the fact that the global economy is doing really well. Overall growth last year is 3.6%, probably going to be on par. Asia's growing again. A lot of the things that were slowing down the global economy have faded away. Very solid numbers. And the dollar's starting to come down as well. So you can expect probably another round of foreign investment starting to move into California as well over the course of next year, also broadly stimulating the economy. It is true, of course, that the trade is increasing both in terms of exports, but also imports have been growing quite sharp as well, which brings me, of course, to probably one of the first problem things that happened quite recently, and that was the announcement of the 25% tariff on steel and 10% on aluminum. And this was a big deal from a news perspective, not the least of which is any number of people in Trump's administration didn't want this, didn't think this was necessary, and of course, one or two of them actually got up and left because of this. Now, when you ask yourself about this personally, does this tariff matter? The answer is absolutely not. In fact, what's so annoying about this conversation, as big as it is how absolutely trivial this tariff actually is. I mean, 25% on steel sounds like a pretty big deal, but keep in mind, steel and aluminum imports are a little over 1% of the $2.4 trillion worth of goods and services we import on a national basis. Tiny, tiny bit, less than, just a little bit over 1%. Well, this is good for jobs. Well, not really, because the entire metal industry, the primary metal industry in the United States, the entire thing hires less than 100,000 people. I mean, best case scenario, this brings a couple thousand jobs back to the Midwest someplace, which, by the way, that's smaller than the margin of error on the monthly job increases we see in our reports. I mean, this is so totally empty at every level. But, don't we need to bring back our steel industry? Actually, 70% of domestic consumption of steel is steel produced here in the United States already. We already have a fairly large domestic industry. So I don't even think prices are going to go up that much. Indeed, you look at this, and you're like, why are we even doing this? It's just so kind of trite and silly. It's not a big deal. And the answer is there is no reason to do it, with the exception of this clown that's your fault, named Peter Navarro. I hope you're proud of yourself, Orange County. Oh, come on now. Wait, you're that embarrassed about Peter, are you? No, he's not that bad of a guy, really. Well, yeah, he is. Never mind. Anyway, so UC Irvine's, of course, travesty is not really having that big of an influence. But this is what scares me. It's not so much about this particular tariff, but the rhetoric of where this may go. And this is the dangerous part. Trade wars are good and easy to win. I mean, that comment is so, again, it's so ridiculous. Nobody wins trade wars ever. It's as simple as that. And there are places where clearly the U.S. could and should push back, but the idea you're going to win this is absolutely ridiculous. But, what's interesting about this is, did everybody see what the European response was? This was classic. The European response was, we can also do stupid. Now, this is European, because if an American said it, they would have said, we can do stupid too. That's what we would have said. But of course, the Europeans say, okay. And that, of course, suggests there is going to be for some tit for tat here. So it's not good. You've got to pay attention to it. But remember that the initial tariff itself is not that big of a deal. And if cooler heads prevail, this shouldn't go anywhere. And I'm hopeful, but we just have to wait and see where this particularly goes. But in the meantime, at least, you have industrial production growing about 3%, manufacturing output at basically a record high level as of the end of last year. Very solid numbers here, suggesting a good, strong base. Housing markets actually picked up just a little bit over the course of last year. The previous year, about 5.2% growth in prices. This year, about 6.2%. Every single market in the United States has seen some modest acceleration in terms of price appreciation, according to the Case-Shiller numbers. This is very good in terms of the pace of construction. Single family, a little over 800,000. Multifamily, still in that 400,000 range. Decent numbers here. Good, solid numbers. Not too hot, not too cold. In terms of existing home sales, running a little less than 5.5 million. Mortgage market activity is still relatively subdued. Overall, mortgage credit in the United States is not even growing at about 5% year on year. Slower than overall price increases. If you ever have a client who comes to you and says, do you think we're in a real estate bubble? You need to point out to your clients one of two things. You say, look, the only time we have a real estate bubble, you can't just look at prices. That doesn't tell you anything. The only time you can say we're in a real estate bubble is if A, we're overbuilding, or B, we're overborrowing. Back in 2004 and 5 and 6, when I was calling into the world, we were both overbuilding and overborrowing. It was very scary. I can tell you, we're not overborrowing. Because with mortgage credit growing slower than the pace of price appreciation, that means leverage in the U.S. housing market continues to fall right now. So we're nowhere near any kind of credit. How about the building side of things? Well, again, not much to talk about there. We're building about 1.2 million per year, which, given overall number of new households forming in the U.S. system, is about right. We're building the right amount of new homes at this point in time. In fact, the only thing truly disappointing out there has to do with the fact that home ownership rates haven't started to bounce back. A little sign that we may be turning, a little signs that credit may be easing just a little bit, but overall, none of these numbers should concern you whatsoever. This is still a very good housing market. It's very steady. This will clearly be the longest housing expansion we've seen ever. It's because the fundamentals are so good, in part because the recovery has been so slow. Now, the only place you might worry about any kind of problems in the industry is the multifamily space. We've been building lots of multifamily. Everybody's been swinging, expecting this big swing back to owner-occupied, which hasn't happened, which is why the apartment markets still look pretty strong. Now, I don't think there's going to be a giant swing because I don't see any immediate release of credit that's going to get a whole bunch of new people back into home ownership. But at the same time, if you do start to see that, don't worry. Because half of all new renters that were created after the Great Recession ended up in single-family rentals. And history shows us that when you do start to swing back, the pendulum starts to move back towards that owner-occupied model, the people who own the single-family rentals will start to sell them off. And you've already heard about the big hedge funds who own thousands of these things talking about it. Because they made their money on the appreciation. For them, the operation of these things is kind of a nightmare. And so they're willing to sell them off and take their money off the table, no problem, as soon as they see the demand. The demand hasn't quite popped up to that level, but you'll probably see this slowly start to occur over the course of the next couple of years. So no real problem there. Retail sales, we had a good Christmas, but it's been cool for the first couple months of the year. Retail sales cooled off, auto sales tipped down. Nothing too spectacular. By the way, I'm glad to see this, because one of my little warning spots in our economy today, outside the trade stuff, was the fact that consumer savings rates have been declining. Now again, this is another warning sign. The last time savings rates were below 3% was back here in 2007. You know where that got us. So people overspending is a dangerous sign for the economy. Don't need to see this, but remember, this is not 2007, because while people are overspending just a little bit, they don't have the massive debt problems they had back in 2006 and 7. Remember, this time around, we just haven't seen a big increase in new credit creation. American households, just over the last year, have finally started to see a tiny, tiny increase in their debt-to-income ratios. And overall, financial obligations ratios are still very, very low. So no signs of any kind of debt issues for American households today. Again, also stability for the next couple of years. Just some warning signs of future problems. Helping, of course, overall consumer spending. You got the payroll job numbers, which look pretty good. Over about 2 million jobs we're adding. Growth in payroll employment right now is running about 1.5% on a year-on-year basis. Not great. In fact, this is the worst year since 2011. But before we start worrying too much about that, when you start to see a slowdown in employment growth, one of the big questions is that being driven by a lack or a slowing in labor demand, or is it something on the supply side? And that, of course, can be best answered by comparing what I call supply and demand. Supply of workers, well, there's a pretty clear problem here. Because overall, that unemployment rate is down really low. The headline unemployment rate, the U3 right now is 4%. The last time it was this low was 07 and 2000. And by the way, in 07 and 2000, we had massive financial bubbles, first tech and then real estate, ripping through the U.S. system. It's that low with no bubble. So this is kind of the real deal. Now, there are those folks out there who say, well, what about the discouraged workers? Well, we have that. That's the U6. That's below 8%. Again, that's a solid number. Now, on the other side, in terms of labor demand, we have something in the U.S. we call the JOLT, the Job Opening and Labor Turnover Survey. It's done by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It started in 2000. And since 2000, we've never seen such a high share of job openings month after month. Job openings are running just a little bit below 4%. For 4 months in a row, there are enormous number of job openings in our economy today. So this slowing we're seeing is not because of a slowdown in labor demand. It's because companies can simply not fill those spots. Not with the existing labor force out there. There's just not enough workers. Now, one of the upsides of that is rising wages. And it's interesting because we continue to hear this story, this theory that Americans haven't had pay increases. And every time they roll out one of those Bureau of Labor Statistics report on a monthly basis, there's always somebody there or us say, well, the nominal wage gains don't look very good. The problem is those numbers that come out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics on a monthly basis are lousy. They're not calculated very well. And there's better ways of doing it. One of the ways of doing it is cleaning up that data and using it a little better. That's done by the Atlanta Fed. And this looks at wage gains for people who had a job over the course of the last year. So you've been employed for the last year. What happened to your wages? On average, real wages for people employed over the last year have been going up 3.5% per year. That's a good number. Median increases are 2%. If you look at the growth in average cost per employee hour, which includes things like healthcare, again, that's running 4%. These are all solid numbers. This is all exactly what you expect to see in a tight labor market. People are getting wage increases. And that's one of these things that never ceases to amaze me. This incredible, weird story that we have built about how Americans are suffering so much. Did you remember during the election, you might have heard the comment, Americans haven't gotten a raise in 15 years. Do you remember that? All the presidential candidates said that at one point in time. Or here's one of my favorite ones. Millennials will be the first generation to have a standard of living worse than their parents. Have you heard this? How can any newscaster say that out loud and not giggle? Millennials, work with me here. Millennials are going to have a worse standard of living than their parents? Well, we know about millennials, right? They're tech-addled, right? They have everything they want, whenever they want, now. They have every gadget in the world. They're taken care of to the point where it's almost insane. And I mean, really, how can we say these things? But this is what's so wrong with so many of these debates. And it comes, by the way, from this data right here. This is average household income. You can get this right off the census webpage. You go under incomes, you go to household, you download the series, and it does kind of show a picture like we just talked about. It showed growing till about 2000. And from 2000 to 2015, average incomes actually went down. 16 popped nice. 16 was a good year, no doubt about it. But the pessimist says, well, yeah, maybe we're getting back on the right track, but we're only a few percent above where we were in 2000. And you'll find this picture on 5,000 web pages. This same exact graph. 2,500 will be left-wing, and they will tell you this is occurring because corporations and special interests and rich people are screwing the middle class. And then you find it on 2,500 right-wing web pages. And they will tell you it's because taxes and regulations are screwing the middle class. And of course, the real answer is the data's wrong. And then, again, this isn't right data. Yes, I understand. You can get it from the census webpage. Read the fine print. This comes out of people's IRS adjusted gross income numbers. Now, for any of you, well, you're real estate agents. You know that your adjusted gross income is not your income, okay? We all know that. But think about it. I mean, any kind of government benefits, if you're any kind of business benefits like the health care, none of that shows up on your form. If you put money into your pensions, you put money into your SEP, doesn't show up. I can go through a litany of things that do not show up on your income. And by the way, those sources of income are growing in importance. Now, we have another set of data. You can go to the BEA, you can get full income, you can divide by the number of households, and oh, it looks like that. Oops. Sorry, rich people, special interests, taxes and regulations. It turns out you're not that big of a deal. Incomes have been rising and rising consistently. And even this doesn't capture how good things are. Because there are so many ways that these numbers don't actually reflect how good we have it. Because in so many ways, our life has improved in ways that economic metrics just don't capture. Now, I don't see any easy millennials here in the front, but whenever I have a millennial in the audience, I always say, can we have a talk about how good your life is compared to mine 30 years ago? Because you don't understand how good you have it in ways that you can't even fathom. And I like to point out, how are things better today than 30 years ago? And the answer is pretty much in every way possible. But let's go through a few of them. Communications is one of my favorite. I got a 2-year-old at home. Grandma lives in Japan, right? 30 years ago, how would she have found out how her grandson was doing? She would have written a letter. Remember those things, right? How trite. A piece of paper, you write on it. Silly stuff. Or you make a phone call. Oh, is he alive? Yeah, great. Love you. Click. It'd be like $30. Today, iPad. And she plays with her grandmother for an hour for free. In full reel there, right? Big picture, HD, right there. And she gets to play with her grandkid. They didn't even have that in Star Trek, for God's sakes. They had to use those stupid walkie-talkie things. Think about that for a second. Think how amazing that is. Medical care. All the things we have. Yeah, it's expensive, but they can do things today that 20 years ago they couldn't even dream of. Entertainment options. When I was a kid, remember how many television? 4 television stations. And that last one with the funny antenna, that was only to watch Doctor Who. Really, we had 3 television stations. Transportation, cars don't break down. Shopping, you get anything you want, anytime you want. Do we appreciate how good our lives are because of Amazon? I have big feet. I got a big guy. I got 15 wives. Does anybody have any idea how traumatic looking for a pair of shoes was on as a child? I would go to store after store after store after store. No. Yeah, I have one pair, and they would roll out the ugliest shoes in the history of mankind. My wife cannot figure out why I have 400 pairs of shoes right now. It's trauma. It's childhood trauma, all right? Because I can is the answer. Food quality, access to information, environmental conditions, legal marijuana, folks, right? I mean, come on, you all remember the Mexican crack we had to smoke as kids, right? I'm still coughing, okay? What isn't better? What isn't better? And the answer, of course, is traffic and the stones. Everything else is bad. So stop whining, America. Shut up. It's amazing. Stop whining. It's crazy. Now, with all this good news, workforce growth, pretty mediocre, about 1%. But this goes back, of course, to a whole separate issue in our economy, which has to do with changing demographics. Labor force growth about 1% is about as good as you're going to get, not because people are so discouraged, not because we don't have manufacturing jobs, not because there are all these 32-year-old males hooked on meth living in trailers in the Midwest. These are ridiculous stories. The answer is because we don't have a lot of adults. Look at population growth of adults. Used to be 2%, now it's about 0.5%. And the adults we do have are getting old, almost 40% are 50 plus. And this, of course, all boils down to the boomers. It's always about the boomers. It's always been about the boomers, and will continue to be about the boomers. The boomers, of course, is that enormous wave in our population. I've done an informal survey, and as far as I can tell, every boomer was in a family with somewhere between 7 and 23 kids. They were packed into a basement on bunk beds, and they didn't know their names. They just rolled them out of the house. Boomers didn't like that experience, and they all had 1.4 kids. And those kids are the most spoiled millennial generation ever. But the result of this, of course, is we went from a population pyramid to a population column. And now every person who enters the labor force, you got one person leaving. And it will be a lot worse, except for the fact of immigration. Those red bars there are the immigrants living here. Out of the secular stagnation, you've heard that, right? The slowdown in growth. We used to grow this much, now we grow this much. Over 2/3 of secular stagnation can be traced to lack of labor force growth. Which is why not too long ago, the Congressional Budget Office, because everybody's worried about slowdown in the economy, they released a nice little survey saying, how do we make the economy grow faster? And number one on the list was enact immigration reform to increase the number of workers. Now again, immigration debates, having millions of people come here without documentation, I get all that. That's not a good system to have. On the other hand, it's pretty obvious we have 11 million undocumented people in this country, and we have full labor markets. The idea that they're stealing American jobs, it's just preposterous propaganda. That doesn't exist. That problem does not exist. We need more people, not fewer. It's as simple as that. That is the metrics. If you want this economy to continue to grow, we need more people. Now, by the way, number 3 is increase the Social Security retirement by 2 ages. By 2 years. And by the way, 2 years is just the start of it. Listen, boomers, can we talk for a second? There's a few of you out here, I see you. You're not hiding, okay? Look, guys, when Social Security was set up, you were supposed to retire at 62 and, like a good worker bee, die at 66. This living to 94 thing wasn't supposed to happen. So just suck it up, work a little longer, okay? You're just going to have to get used to it. Otherwise, as soon as my generation takes over, we're cutting you guys off, all right? Just warning you now. There's a couple other things on here as well. Reform the income tax code and reduce deficits. One thing that did happen last year, of course, was the big tax plan. And the CBO said it, reform taxes. Did we have tax reform? And the answer is no. Because there's a big difference between tax cutting, which we got, and tax reforms, which we didn't. And let me explain. Reagan was a tax-cutting genius. Well, okay, I'll buy that, although in the end we had to pull back on that and Bush had to raise taxes again. Reagan and Tip O'Neill were tax reform geniuses. That was the true value of what happened under the Reagan administration. Because over time, tax systems have this tendency, to, because of political pressures, quickly become unequal. There's always these interest groups lining up for their special perk, their special loophole, their special deduction, their special write-off. And over time, the tax system becomes fairly unfair, where some groups are paying much less than they should, and as a result of that, because the government still needs money, they end up taxing other people too much. And that is a problem. Good taxes are fair, flat taxes on lots of people, not this crazy mishmash of 4 people with exactly the same income paying 4 completely different amounts depending on their occupation and their industry. That's not how it's supposed to work. So, do we need tax reform? Hell yeah. Look, the statutory tax rate, corporate tax rate is 35%. Too high? Ridiculously too high. Distortionary? Crazy distortionary. Needed to come down? Needed to come down. The effective corporate tax rate was 21%. Think of that. Statutory 35, effective 21%. That suggests that tons of companies weren't paying anywhere close to what they should. And yes, some of those are the big oil companies, and who knows, probably the gun companies. But guess what? It's also some of our fair-haired golden children in California as well. Because anybody who thinks that Apple and Google is paying anywhere near their fair share of corporate taxes, go look how many billions of dollars they have sitting in the bank, okay? Those guys can step up and pay a little bit more too. But we didn't have the alternative minimum tax for corporations. That never got put in. They cut the top level, not got rid of the bottom line, and ultimately that means it's deficit spending. There's no way you're going to make this thing pay for yourself. So they tried to, primarily by offsetting some of the limitations to distorting deductions, of which, yes, some of that state and local taxes and the interest deduction, but a lot more of it, of course, is also wrapped around interest deductions for corporations and some of the other things. Now, look, I appreciate that for those in the industry, you see the interest deduction going away. It's not a happy circumstance, and I understand why the NAR and the CAR are pushing hard to get that reinstated. They don't want to see it. But again, I'm not so worried about it. I'm not so worried about it for California, particularly real estate, as I come to in a second, because we have such an incredible housing shortage in the state. I don't think it matters. Equivalently, it doesn't matter for the health of our economy either, because 80% of Californians don't itemize. Over 80% of Californians take the standard. Their taxes went down, not up. And that will be broadly stimulative. Now, for a group of upper middle income folks, they will take a hit. This will be a little bit of a rough year. And I think you're going to feel a little bit of that pressure. People are going to be a little less happy, a little less willing to throw money at it. But again, relative to the housing shortage we're dealing with, it's just not that big of a deal. And because of the broad stimulation this is going to create for the California economy, both because of more spending for that bottom 80%, and also because of the greater spending in the U.S. economy overall, we're going to breeze through this without much of a glitch. So I don't think you need to worry about too much about it. But just, just like I said, there'll be some dips and some bumps this year because of it, and then it'll be behind us, and it'll be over with a shout. It's like getting rid of a tooth. Just get through it, okay? Gone. Most corporation households will pay less in taxes, and that's going to give a short burst to the economy. But of course, it comes as a cost, and the cost is, A, it's incredibly regressionary. The top 0.5% get vast majority of it. And of course, it's going to add $2 to $4 trillion to the budget over the course of the next 10 years. And that, to me, is the biggest issue of all. Because remember, all those boomers retiring is going to put unprecedented stress on the social insurance programs. Well, take, for example, the federal budget deficit. Prior to the tax plan, the CBO was already predicting $10 trillion of new federal debt over the course of the next decade because of boomers retiring. $10 trillion in new debt. And the Republican answer to this is to add $2 to $4 trillion on top of it. So again, this is where my head starts to melt down, because you have Democrats who would tell you there's no problem with entitlement. It's fine, nothing to see here. House is totally burning. What fire? I don't see any fire. Everything's behind me, right? And then the Republicans get into power and they're like, oh, that house is on fire. We have a big problem. I'm going to throw gas on it. Whoa. These are our parties. These are our choices, right? The truth, of course, is, yeah, there's a big problem. And by the way, more debt is not the solution. Where we go from here remains to be seen. But keep an eye out. You're already starting to see a sharp increase in borrowing. It's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out. That might be one of the bigger impacts on the market over the course of the next year or so. As for the Fed's gotten aggressive. The Fed has been stomping on the brake. 5 rate hikes. I think today they're meeting again, deciding if there's another one or not. And it's interesting because as much as they've hiked, really the 10-year rate hasn't responded very much. The big thing has been flattening that yield curve out. Now, recently, that did reverse itself. Just in the last month or so, we had the big panic. The S&P dropped to 10%. The 10-year bond rate went up to a little less than 3%. And a lot of folks got a little nervous about this. Now, before you get too nervous, I like context. And by the way, there's a lot of people taking pictures out there. We're going to have these pictures. They're going to have these slides posted so you can go ahead and download the PDF at beaconecon.com at the end. But context is everything. First of all, take the 10-year bond. Yeah, it's almost up to 3%, and that's still lower than at any time before 2006. That's still really, really low. And of course, while it is true the stock market dropped about 10%, it gained a little bit of that back, but overall it's still up about 20% on a year-on-year basis. So there's nothing here. It's fine. It's just kind of noise. Now what set it off was worries about inflation. And again, this to me makes no sense. The January employment number had a big wage gain. There's nothing in the January employment figures you trust. We try to seasonally adjust, but it's really hard from December to January. There's nothing in that survey that means anything. Ignore it. And as for the CPI, a couple big months there, but remember, those 2 big months you see here are offsetting the big decline we saw back here last year. On net, the core PCE is up about 1.5% on a year-on-year basis. That's below target. And other indicators of inflation, M2, which is money supply growth, that's decelerated to the weakest it's been since the middle of the Great Recession. That's not inflationary, that's deflationary. Bank lending. Bank lending. Just have to talk to it. I'm getting it now. I'm getting it. Bank lending. All right. There we go. Okay. Bank lending. All right, we're good. Bank lending slowed down. Bank lending. Little help? All right. Thank you. Bank lending slowed down. Again, if I look at bank lending slowing down, I look at M2 growth slowing down, I look at this and I think there's deflationary pressures, not inflationary. And with the dollar coming down again, you're going to see people putting money back in. I don't see rates going up. There's no reason for it. We still have a global savings glut. We still don't have any inflation. There's just no reason for the 10-year bond to go up pretty dramatically. So I think this is about it. My guess is maybe they'll stay here and they might drift down just a little bit. Now, in the next couple of years, as government borrowing starts to ramp up, that's when you might see more pressures, but not now. Not now. I think things are going to be relatively stable in the near term. So why is the Fed getting so aggressive? Well, they probably think there's a bubble in the stock market. And maybe there is, maybe there's not. The numbers are a little high, but then interest rates are low. And you might say, well, the market's been going up a lot, but on the other hand, it lost a lot during the Great Recession, and they did get their nice tax cuts, and corporate profits are growing. I don't know. What I do know is this. While it may be a little bit of a bubble, overall debt to GDP ratios are still going down. We don't have a big amount of leverage out there. This isn't fundamentally a threat to our system at this point in time. It's not something I'm paying attention to. It's just not an issue by itself. As long as the real economy is healthy, it's pretty much irrelevant what happens in the stock market. So don't worry too much about that. How about our fair state of California? Oh, we become a... Back me up. There you go. I just like him. He looks so sad, doesn't he? It's kind of like Jerry Brown getting ready to move out of Sacramento. I like Jerry. I hope that wasn't. We meant that in all due respect for the man. Come on. So he's got this weird high-speed rail thing. Let it go. So where are we? I mean, and you know, again, the state's on fire, folks. We had to read another round of California bashing, and everybody's telling us how terrible things are. How terrible is it? Over the last 5 years, 8th fastest growing economy, 2.6% job growth per year. Yes, that's faster than Texas. 1 out of 6 jobs in the United States produced here in California. Of course, the skeptics will tell you, oh, sure you have lots of jobs, but they're bad jobs. I always love that term, bad jobs. Well, how bad are they? We've added 1.3 million full-time workers to our economy in the last 4 years, of which 600,000 earn over 100K per year. Those aren't bad jobs. Those are damn good jobs. And look at the number. California's share of national personal income has never been higher than it is right now. 14% of all income created in this nation is created right here in California. Oh, rich people are fleeing because of high taxes. Really? Okay. Well, it turns out 18% of all Californian households make over 150K per year. 18%. Compare that to not even 12% for the rest of the nation. By the way, that's up that's almost up 5 percentage points from where it was 4 years ago, compared to not even 3 percentage points up for the rest of the nation. we're making money hand over fist in this state. That's not the issue. People aren't fleeing this state. That's not the issue. Tons of money. And that's true here in Orange County as well. Wages continue to go up here. $65,000 is the average payroll worker in the state. Orange County is a little above $60,000 right now. San Diego just got to $60,000. To put that in context with you, in terms of median household income, up 10% in the last 3 years. Median income's up 12%. Earnings for workers up 9.3%. And the gains across the board. Solid numbers. People are earning more money. Lots of high-income households here in the area. 23.2% of all households in Orange County are making over $150,000 a year. 1 out of 4 are making more than $150,000 a year. This is a very successful community, to say the very least. Lots of good signs. Exports, record year in 2017. Airports, hotels, busy like nobody. Non-residential doing fine. GDP growth still faster than the U.S. overall. How many statistics do you need to prove that California is not a drag on the California economy? It is pushing the U.S. economy forward. We are the driver of growth in this particular state. Local spending, thank you. Local spending running about 3%, better numbers in Orange, good numbers in Huntington Beach in terms of growth, but overall about 3.1% on year-to-year. Non-residential statistics, basically rents are up, vacancy rates are down. The only place you're seeing vacancy rates rise is in office space in LA, and that's because of a big surge in supply coming online. Otherwise, everything still suggests good, solid numbers here. Construction, look at non-rent permits here in Orange County, still doing fine. Orange County Airport, still doing fine. Good numbers there as well. But with all this good news, there has been a big slowdown in job growth, particularly along the coasts. Orange County, Anaheim, MSA, as the case may be. Actually, this was really bad. It was about 1%. They revised up to about 2.5%, but not quite where it was back here in 2.9% back in 2015, and it's going to slow down even more. In fact, it's interesting. I mean, look at San Francisco, 4.5% down to 1.9. San Diego, 2.9 down to 1.6. All these coastal economies are slowing down, and as a result of that, the fastest growing economies for job growth, this is straight off the presses. This is the data that came out last week. Stockton, Inland Empire, and Fresno are the 3 fastest growing economies in California right now for jobs. Now think of that. Stockton, Inland Empire, and Fresno. This is not a demand problem. This, of course, is a supply problem, and the supply problems are incredibly acute. Take the unemployment rate here in Orange County. Right now, it's about 3.5%. 3.5%. That's the lowest it's been since 2000. As for Orange County and Inland Empire, they are down to a little over 4%. And remember, the Inland Empire is particularly important because where are all these workers that commute here coming from? They come from the Inland Empire. The Inland Empire is 4.4. It's never been that low in the Inland Empire. Ever. Since they started measuring unemployment, has the unemployment rate been this low. So we're running out of workers. That is an enormous issue. You look at the numbers. Here in the area, good solid numbers, of course, last year, about 40,000 jobs created, 13,000 in admin support, a lot of that's temp jobs, but healthcare, construction, hospitality, all doing pretty well in terms of new job creation. After that, a little bit of a mishmash. But you know, I think about the housing issue, and how do you think about how that's impacting? What does it mean for housing demand? Well, this graph right here, the red line is household employment, and the blue line is payroll employment. And let me explain the difference between those two, because you'll see them quite a bit. But you probably don't recognize the difference. Payroll employment is, you're counted if you get a W-2. And by the way, you're counted in the county you work in. Household employment is not based on having a W-2. If you're self-employed, you'll be in the household, but you won't be in payroll. If you have 2 jobs, you'll end up in 2 places in payroll, but you won't be in 1 place in household. And household is measured by where you live. So what this says, if you go back to say 1998, at that point in time, basically household employment was 84,000 larger than payroll employment. So there were 85,000 more people with jobs in Orange County than there were payroll jobs in Orange County. And that meant either some of those people were self-employed or some of those people drove out of the county for work on a daily basis. Today, it's now flipped, and now payroll employment is 63,000 above household employment. That swing, 150,000, is roughly the increase in commuters over the last 20 years. 150,000 people coming into Orange County on a daily basis for work. That is how things have shifted. Go look at the 91. Go look at the 55. See what's happening. It's crazy, and that is because there's lots of jobs and no housing in Orange County itself. It is all about the housing. And housing is a problem across the state. We don't go west, young man. We put up the "we do not want you" signs. As much as our labor market is strong, as much as our businesses need people, they're not getting them. Net migration in the state's running 0.2% over the last 5 years. For our unemployment rate being as low as it is, for wage growth as much as it is, it's crazy that people aren't moving here. Because I tell you what, they are moving. You look where the millennials are. They're moving to Arizona. They're moving to Colorado. They're moving to Oregon. They're moving to Washington. They're moving to Texas. They're moving west. They're moving south. They want to be out of the Midwest and the Northeast, and they want to be here. And we're like, yeah, we don't want you. We don't want you. Don't come here because we're not willing to build housing for you. And we're not. We sat down. We did some basic simulations. We asked ourselves the fundamental question. Come on, people. If you wanted to grow 2% per year in terms of job growth in this state, how many housing units do you need a year? The answer is 210 to 260,000. What are we building now? About 115,000 per year. Half, not even half of what we need. We're running up into a basic functional problem. We are running out of workers. And for all the commercial guys building those office buildings, that's all fine and wonderful. Who's going to work in the damn things? Housing is a critical issue, and we are not building it. Now, things have changed a bit. I was really glad when Gavin Newsom and Villaraigosa got into this debate over how many housing units are they going to build when they become governor. And I like this because for the first time, we heard from somebody in Sacramento that this is not an affordability issue, it's a supply issue. That's a huge difference. If you talk about this from the affordable issues, the only thing you worry about is inclusionary housing and rent controls and things that are so-called supposed to help affordability. And that's not the issue. The issue here is we have a lack of supply that's having an impact on affordability. You have to fix supply to fix affordability. You don't fix affordability on its own. And you can see the numbers. I mean, inventories. Right now, month supply, I'm sure you've seen these numbers. It's tighter here than it was prior to the Great Recession. Numbers across the board are going up. Orange County, 747,000 and climbing, 7% increase. Sales have been steady, running between the 5,000 and 6,000. But here's the numbers as of January of this year. Newport Beach up 9.8% at 1.8 cool million. You've got 910,000 for Tribuca. You got Anaheim, 550, you have 8%. Across the board, prices are going up because there's simply not enough supply. And I know people got to roll up the affordability metrics. I always love the affordability metrics. Nobody in this neighborhood could afford to buy this house. Well, it's a good thing that everybody in this neighborhood already lives here because they don't need to buy it. Look, prices of homes isn't set on the income of people who live there. It's set by the incomes of people who want to live there. And when you don't build enough housing, that income limit gets higher and higher, and that means these bidding wars become more intense. You've got to build more housing. Now, if you look at some of these new characteristics, I pulled out some of these numbers. A lot of new housing is actually over the 65 range. 22% of all housing being purchased in Orange County right now is by people 65 years and older. So not only do you have a problem with not having enough housing for workers, but now you have retired people buying homes, which is going to make it that much worse. So you even have this whole secondary boomer issue in this area as well, making these issues even worse. So you need more housing. It's as simple as that. Now, in terms of permits, where are they? There was a nice surge in the multifamily space in 14 and 15, and sadly, it's already starting to turn back down again. Now, I don't know why this is. I know there's some worries. People thought that we were having too many apartments. A couple of the small places where we got a lot of apartments, you saw vacancy rates go down. But that's all just a pace of absorption issue. That's already going the other direction. Vacancy rates in all these areas is already starting to go down again. Is some of it NIMBYism? I don't know. But the fact that this is going down should not make you happy. You want to see it continue to increase. You need simply more permits overall. There you go. Now, the lack of affordability, hang on, I'm getting there. You can certainly see it in terms of apartments. We know apartment rents continue to rise as well. Again, symptomatic of an overall lack of housing. Numbers keep going up. And one of the impacts of the, come on, go back for me, will you? Thank you. One of the impacts on this is clearly you are having problems in some populations. We know there's rising homeless. We understand that there's overcrowded housing. There's about 818,000 people in California who live in overcrowded conditions. That's more than one person per room. That's up 75, almost 10% over the course of the last 5 years. That's a problem. Orange County, same sort of thing. It's up 16%. I get that. That's a problem. But guess what? This isn't the entire problem. This is a small subsection on it. In fact, one of the upsides of labor shortages is the fact that wages are rising, not just for high-income people, but for everybody. I don't know if you caught it before when I'm showing you incomes for Orange County. This is incomes for the entire state. People without a high school degree are actually seeing the biggest rate of pay increases in the state right now, because it's low-skilled folks who are in shortest supply right now, because those are the ones who are leaving because housing is so damn unaffordable. So interestingly enough, every time I turn on, I've been to a number of these multifamily conferences, and you got people saying, oh, rents can't go any higher. Why not? Oh, people are maxed out. Well, no, they're not. They're getting nice pay increases. And as a result of that, rents are going up. And not only are rents going up, actually rent burdens are going down. Now, this again is one of these things that people don't really appreciate. But if you look at overall rent as a share of income, if you look at the number of people who are rent constrained, it's actually been falling because incomes are rising. And of course, I like to point out that if you're worried about competitiveness in places like Texas, you can't just pay attention to renters. You got to pay attention to owners. Because you look at the gap, this is a share that our mortgage burden, over 30% spent on mortgages. You know, in 2015, it's 44% in Los Angeles. You got Orange County where it's 40%, and then you go to Houston where it's 25%. This to me is as important, if not more important, than rental burdens on renters. So you got to build more. That's how you deal with this. And you know, I've heard of, well, you can't just let the private sector loose. Why not? Because they'll just build units for high-end people. So what? Look, for every high-income family you deny a housing unit to, they're going to go down the road, pick one of your cherished workforce housing neighborhoods, and they're going to gentrify it. So for every unit you don't build here, you'll lose one down here. That's the trade-off you always have to keep in mind when you're having these sort of things. The concept there, by the way, is known as filtering. The idea that you build at the top to free up space at the bottom. And I didn't bring my damn filtering slides. I forgot to put them in here, and I should have, because it's fascinating. I was looking at, for example, income of people, households living in really old apartments. In San Francisco, for apartments built before 1970, I'm talking the old crap, stuff they built before they had closets. They didn't have clothes back then, apparently, right? No closets, right? These horrible units, well over 60% of apartments built before 1970 are lived in by people earning over $75,000 a year. You just push everybody out. So you got to get to build more. You have to have more permits. And that means secret reform. It means Prop 13 reform. It means permit fee reform. It's about simply getting the multiple barriers out of the way. It's about encouraging cities to want housing. You got to remember, cities have a big problem because of Prop 13. Prop 13 limits the local funding from local residents. What does that mean? It means for any city, talk to any city manager, they would tell you, my residents consume 85% of my expenses, and my residents give me 20% of my revenues. When 20% of your revenues are costing you 85% of your budget, is it any wonder that cities don't want housing? You can't rely on the big ideas of a good mayor to drive housing supply. You have to make it financially viable. So I'm frustrated because I don't see any big changes, but I did see one change. It's something to keep an eye on. Two things. One thing that passed last year, and I didn't even get it, it snuck by me as well, but one of my guys who's kind of a housing policy guy pointed out SB 35 is really important. Anybody heard of SB 35? Exactly. So here's SB 35 in a nutshell. If you're not compliant with your RENA standards, builders who have some amount of inclusionary housing can apply directly to the state for permission to build. They can go to the state and go, look, I have 20% inclusionary housing. This city is not compliant with its RENA standards. Therefore, I want to build here. And the state can say, yes, you can. It doesn't matter what the city wants. It basically becomes by right. As long as you're in zoning, they can't stop you. Very interesting. The first two permits for this kind of construction just went in front of the state. They're going to be sued. It's going to go through lawsuit. It's going to be interesting to see how the state Supreme Court does this. Keep an eye on it. It's fascinating. Here's the other big thing. SB 828, which takes arena reforms, and it makes it even more serious. It's going to up all the numbers. Because the arena numbers, even that nobody is complying with right now, are still ridiculously small. We did a housing study for Long Beach. Long Beach, their arena numbers say they need 8,000 more units. By our conservative calculation, over the next 10 years, they need 57,000 units. So if you get arena standards anywhere close to something reasonable, this is going to change things. Now, mind you, it's more for rental spaces. It's got to have some inclusionary housing, but it will take some of the lease off. The other thing is SB 827, which is going through committee now. We are building light rail all over California, and you're building it in neighborhoods, and they're leaving zoning as single family. Around light rail stations, they are leaving single family zoning in. That's nuts. And the state's going to step in and force cities to change the zoning around light rail to be higher density. And that is almost assuredly going to go through. That is also going to change things. So keep in mind some big movements in terms of regulatory front, things that are changing the calculus. Again, a new mayoral campaign, seems like, gubernatorial campaign where they actually are talking about fixing things right. This should take some of the relief off, but in the short term, none of this is going to matter. In the short term, housing constraints are going to stay in place. In the short term, the next 2 years, prices are going to continue to go up because there's nowhere close to enough housing in this state, particularly in this county. Simple as that. So, wrapping it all up. GDP going to be good this year, 3% plus. State revenues are going to be strong. Labor markets are going to be tight. Wages are going to go up. You're going to see increasing demand for housing. Credit constraints are loosening up just a little bit. There may be some more regulatory reform that's going to make that go a little farther. In other words, guess what? It's going to be a good year for housing, at least from a price perspective. There's going to be demand. There's going to be people out there, but they're going to bid prices up, and the cries about bubbles, the cries about gentrification are going to become that much more acute because we're not taking any serious steps to deal with the shortage problems. But remember, in the end, it's a shortage. There are these negatives out there. They're going to start hitting the economy. How this shakes out after 2 years still remains to be seen, but the Fed's going to continue to tighten. Markets are going to look frothy. Consumer savings is deficit territory. The federal deficit is going to start widening, and that could have an impact on interest rates, not now, but in a year or so. So that's something else to talk to your clients on. It's not now about inflation. That's not the issue. In a year and a half, when the deficit's going through the roof, that's when you start worrying about interest rates a little bit more. But not now. Right now, it's not that big of a deal. And of course, political uncertainty, the kabuki theater surrounding this administration is crazy. And where this shakes out, again, hard to be seen. If I said there's any one major risk of a recession in less than the last 24 months, it almost assuredly is trade-related. But again, I'm hopeful that cooler minds will actually prevail. And I'm heartened by the fact that Kudlow just got picked up as the new economic advisor because he's also a free trader. So I'm hopeful that this will back off and these things will start to fade away. But on net, for the next couple of years, you're just fine. After that, the problem, of course, again, is the great disconnect. We continue to hear politicians who worry about the jobs. Oh, we worry about, every time someone wants to roll something out, they want to talk about jobs, jobs, jobs. We need jobs, jobs, jobs. You know, we have lots of jobs. We're running out of workers. And, you know, I'm the guy who had to point out, you know, LA was so excited. Oh my God, we're number the top 20. We made it into the Amazon reality show for HQ2. And people in LA are so excited about that. I'm like, wait a minute. You have record low unemployment rate. You have a massive housing shortage. And you want to drop 50,000 overpaid tech millennials in the middle of this mess? Are you thinking straight? We don't need jobs. We need housing. It's not jobs, jobs, jobs. It's roofs that we need to be worrying about, okay? Who pays for health care? I don't care about that. What I want to know is what it is we're paying for. Because that's the big issues. We worry about tax levels, we should worry about tax structure. We worry about income inequality, we should be panicked about wealth inequality. We worry about funded government liabilities, we should worry about unfunded government liabilities. We worry about business investment, we should worry about a lack of public investment. We worry about inflation, worry about slowing lending. We worry about the cost of California housing, we need to worry about the supply of California housing. You know, it's very simple. You're never going to get the right answer until you start asking the right question. So enjoy the next couple of years. It's going to be healthy. It's going to be prosperous. You're going to make money. But we have these issues, and it's up to us to start forcing our political leaders to start asking the right questions, not the questions that their hyper-partisan base wants them to ask. So it's up to us. It's up to you in this audience to make sure people hear you about what needs to be looked at, what needs to be considered. And there it is. Thank you very much. Two questions. I'm told I have two because I talked too long. We started late though.
Anyone have a question?
Yes, back there. Stand up and yell it out, sir. I can't hear you. Stand up and yell. Yes. No, it's 15 wide. 15 wide. Yes, it really is 15 wide. And getting bigger by the day. That was a fast one. Another one? Yes.
What is the real possibility that anything can be done to lower the cost, the assessed cost for building a home in the state of California? I hear it's up to about $200,000 before you turn the dirt.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good question. So the question is why are permits and fees so expensive? And the answer is because property taxes are so low. You know, again, I go back to this idea that, and I know this is a real estate crowd. You mentioned Prop 13, and I can hear you all pulling out your knives. You're just sliding it out of your boot. All right. But look, put that to one side. You got to recognize that cities lose money every time someone builds a house because they have to supply that house with infrastructure, with safety, and it's expensive. So what they do is they front load it. Because you can't get the flow over time through property taxes, you front load it in terms of permits and fees. It's almost like, as opposed to borrowing money through bonds to build a highway, you force the current population to pay all those highway costs up front. It's going to be enormously expensive and painful, and it's going to make roads really hard to build. So it's almost the same idea. Now, maybe the idea here is you don't get rid of Prop 13, but how about taking those permit fees and amortizing it over the life, over a 20-year life of the house, right? Maybe that would work. I'm sure there's some clever solutions that can be put into place so we don't have to front load everything. And it means either being creative or having a basic conversation about how this state taxes and how do we make it so that cities want housing rather than reject it because it's a cost-benefit analysis situation. Last one. We'll wrap up here. So make it a good one. Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. So you made two great questions. Okay, so the first one, you could use Mello-Roos, which I agree with. There are systems to do that if we want to go to government regulation. Me personally, I want to take I'd rather just create the proper incentives. But the second question you said, and I agree completely, you said, well, wait a minute, Chris. The worker in that house is going to work at one of these commercial businesses, and that provides tax revenues. That's true. But the problem... And the new house has a higher tax base, but don't forget that diminishes over time, and of course, relative to what it costs, because again, the disparity is crazy when it comes to city managers and what they rely on in terms of their own tax base. They don't get it from the residents. Now the key is this is in economics, I call this prisoner's dilemma. And the whole key here is that my city, I'm Mountain View, okay? I'm not going to build any housing. I'm going to rely on San Jose to build my housing while I sit on my nice cushy tax base. Santa Monica does the same damn thing, right? They have a nice cushy tax base, they build no housing. Let everybody else deal with the problems because I want my revenues and my nice thick budget. But when every city does that, we don't build enough housing anywhere. And it only becomes, again, this rare mayor who pops up, whether it's Jerry Brown in Oakland or Garcetti in LA, the rare mayor to stand up and go, well, I don't care, this is financially doesn't make any sense for my city, I'm going to build housing anyway. Well, you don't want to rely on that kind of mayor. What you want to have to do is you want to break the prisoner's dilemma by making cities want housing. And again, Prop 13, we don't even have to go there. I have a solution. How about we take all city revenues in the state, put it in one barrel, and distribute it on the basis of population? Why should taxable sales only go to the city where the mall is? That's kind of a dumb system, isn't it? Particularly when the people shopping the mall could be from 100 different places. So there are ways of doing it, but you have to align incentives. In the end, it always boils down to incentives. Make cities want housing, and they will build it. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.